The prophet speaks of terror, a word that has become very much in our vocabulary, in the news of the day. Our English word terror is an exact duplication of the Latin word, exact same. And it means either I can inflict great pain and suffering on somebody else, or I can be the victim of great pain and suffering. In any case, terror always involves extreme violence. The violence that human beings have always been capable of inflicting on one another. It may seem to us today that it is more extreme, that it happens more frequently, but it goes way back in our human history. And it's the result of what St. Paul spoke about in the second reading, human sin. The capacity of human beings to do evil to one another. That's the worst thing of all, that human beings can do harm and terrorize one another. The prophet was speaking from a very, very difficult political situation. The land of Israel was in constant threat of being invaded by foreign powers. The kings of the time were themselves more politically motivated than religiously. And so the prophet spoke out in the name of God, and because of the word of God. And that's something that comes down to us today. We look for the right thing in our leaders because God has spoken, and we hear the word of God, and we try to put it into practice. But the result of not doing that is the terror that we read about on all sides. We don't experience so much in this country. We had a terrible attack in 2001, only sporadic in the meantime. In other countries, it's been more prevalent and more terrifying. So it's a part of our human life. It's a part of our everyday experience. Then we have Jesus in the gospel saying repeatedly, 3 times in this one short paragraph, do not be afraid. Jesus keeps telling us, do not be afraid. The essence of terror is that it involves terrible fear. It involves the experience of evil and violence being invaded or on the world that we live in. But Jesus says, do not be afraid. Why? Is there a conflict between these two? Jesus never tries to take us out of the real world. He is deeply concerned with the world that we live in and the people who live in it, the experience of real people in the world that we live in. If he says, do not be afraid, he's not denying the fact, which he himself experienced, of course, of the terrible evil that exists and that people can inflict on one another. But he's saying that for those of us who believe, we have to live with that terror and at the same time be not overcome by it in the depths of our hearts, of our being. He is saying that no matter what terror exists in the world around us, and even very close to us, God is always present. Now that may be not very easy to live by if you're being bombed, if you're being shot at, if the world around you is crumbling to pieces, as is happening in places in the world today. It's not easy. But that is the essence of faith. That faith says, in the midst of the horror, the terror, the evil of this world, the reality of God, the blessing of God, the peace of God is also present. And we have to find a way in which we balance those two things. The recognition of terror and our ability to exist alongside of it, and at the same time, to really believe that God is with us. It is not easy. We may experience in our own personal lives terrible, the adjective goes along with the noun, terrible pain and suffering and loss. We may experience those things. And how do we reconcile that with the blessing, the presence of God? I may have said this once before, but I'm getting old and I repeat myself. When I was working in a hospital once, I was sitting with a mother whose child was very, very sick and faced the possibility of not surviving. And she said to me, "Where is God, Basil? Where is God?" She felt the terror, the awful experience of the possibility of loss of her most precious possession, her child. All I could say to her was, God is here. God is here in the midst of the terror, of the suffering, of the pain. We have to cultivate that within ourselves. It isn't just simply dumped on us so that we can just grab onto it. It's something that we cultivate to experience maybe in other ways. Maybe we experience pain and suffering and coming out of it and having the reality of joy and new life given to us. Whatever the case may be, in all things, whatever happens, God is present. That's the only reason we are here this morning as a community of faith, that we really believe that God is present no matter what happens. Things that we cannot control and God does not control. But God is present in it all. And so therefore, I say to you what the Lord has said to us so many, many times in the gospel. Do not be afraid.